Hello and thanks for watching. In this short video I'll demonstrate how the Forum Sentry API Security Gateway can be configured as a SAML single sign-on identity provider for Salesforce.com. With this setup, Active Directory users who have authenticated to Sentry can seamlessly access their Salesforce accounts without having to log in to Salesforce.com directly. It's important to note that while this demo focuses on Salesforce single sign-on, Sentry can be used as an identity provider for any SAML 2.0 SSO service provider. In fact, Sentry has been deployed at many large enterprises as a SAML identity provider for dozens of internal and external apps, including SharePoint, Tableau, ServiceNow, IdP, Ariba, and many others. The benefits of using Sentry as a SAML identity provider align with the three core features of the product. API security. The PKI keys used to sign SAML assertions are stored in the secure platform, and you can be sure the signatures are applied with the latest and greatest algorithms. API identity. User records can be stored in virtually any type of identity repository, LDAP or Active Directory being a commonly used one, and Sentry will simply hook into them, and users can authenticate to Sentry a variety of ways, including cookies, OAuth tokens, user and password, Kerberos, to name a few. Sentry can also validate user attribute information, not just that their credentials are correct, before generating a SAML assertion for the user. This provides an extra level of authorization and access management that you won't find with most identity provider products. And lastly, API integration. Sentry is not just a SAML SSO IDP. It is an API security gateway and the very extensive point-and-click taskless processing engine that is used with the more complex API flows is also available with the SAML identity provider processing. Many SAML service provider endpoints will essentially be open source modules added to custom applications, and they will not be very flexible. Many won't even be SAML spec compliant, and this is where the flexibility of the Sentry becomes very important. Very quickly, I want to discuss the differences between IdP and SP-initiated SAML single sign-on flows. This demo will highlight an IdP-initiated SAML SSO flow, but Sentry fully supports both IdP and SP-initiated SAML single sign-on. With IdP-initiated flows, the user first authenticates to the identity provider, Sentry in this demo, and is then redirected to the service provider, which in this case is Salesforce. With SP-initiated flows, the user first goes to the service provider and is redirected to the identity provider to authenticate. After logging in, the user gets a SAML token and is redirected back to the service provider for single sign-on. Now let's review the SAML SSO scenario I'll be demonstrating. In this demo, the user will first authenticate to Sentry using a form post authentication from a login page. Sentry will validate the user and password credential using an Active Directory call. At the same time, Sentry will collect the user's email address from Active Directory. Sentry will then set an HTTP session cookie for the user and tie the user's email as well as other attributes to the cookie. After authenticating the user and setting the cookie, Sentry will redirect the user to a secure landing page, where the user can click links to access different applications without having to log into them individually. Note that while this is a common use case, this is certainly not the only way a user could authenticate to Sentry. In many Windows AD domain environments, Sentry authenticates users via Kerberos tickets generated when the user logs into the domain, and in those cases the users don't have a login page at all. Now on the landing page, the user clicks the link to go to the application, in this case Salesforce. The link actually points to a Sentry STS policy, which is the Sentry IdP endpoint. The STS policy validates the cookie to identify the user. Sentry then builds a SAML assertion that includes the user's email address that was tied to the cookie during the original AD authentication. The email address in the SAML is used by Salesforce to identify the user. Salesforce was already configured to trust Sentry as the identity provider, so it validates the signature of the SAML, reads the email address, and signs the user in. Let's have a look at the STS policy in Sentry that will be used as the IdP policy. STS policies are service mode policies, meaning that a request comes in, is processed by Sentry, and then a response is sent back. There is no backend server, as is often the case with other types of policies in Sentry that handle REST, SOAP, and HTML communications. On the virtual directory, note that the cookie authentication is required. This is how the STS policy identifies the user. On the STS tab are the settings to configure the SAML token, sign the token, and redirect to the service provider. So let's see this policy in action. First, the user authenticates to Sentry via form post using AD credentials. Sentry validates the username and password via an LDAP call to AD, sets a session cookie for the user, and redirects to the secure landing page. Now the user can click a link to access Salesforce. This link points to the STS policy we just reviewed. The STS policy validates the user's cookie, generates the SAML using the email address, and redirects to the service provider, in this case Salesforce.com. Salesforce is pre-configured to trust SAML assertions generated by the Sentry IdP, so it verifies the digital signature Sentry applied to the SAML, finds the user's email address in the token, and then logs the user in. From a Sentry logging perspective, there's just one transaction for this SAML SSO flow with Salesforce. This is the call to the STS policy. You can see Sentry validate the cookie to identify the user, generate the XML SAML with the user's email address, and lastly return the HTML form to the browser with the encoded SAML. The browser will use JavaScript to post this encoded SAML to Salesforce. Please note that Forum Sentry is available as a hardware appliance, virtual appliance for VMware, in the Amazon and Azure clouds, and as a single package install for Linux, Windows, or Solaris. That's all for now. Thank you very much for watching, and if you would like more information, please visit us at www.forumsys.com.